It's time for Animal Outlook's Vegan Family Podcast with your hosts Eric C. Lindstrom and Cheryl Leahy.
Welcome to this week's Vegan Family Podcast. Today we're dedicating a whole episode to the dairy industry on the occasion of Mother's Day.
That's right. Mothers are the best. Human and cow and all animals. Plus, this week we have a special guest. More on that in a bit.
Our first guest. I'm really excited about this episode because COK just released a groundbreaking investigation of a large dairy farm in Pennsylvania, and it just sort of got us thinking.
Yeah, that's right. That investigation actually has gotten some really amazing coverage. Our listeners can find out more at cok.net/ditch dairy. There's a lot there. There's a petition there. There's a video that the undercover investigator discovered at this dairy farm in Pennsylvania. So we'll have more on that in this episode. We'll have our special guest and much, much more when we come back.
And we're back.
Yay. So Veg Week, Cheryl, just ended as we sit here. It ended last week, or on Sunday, I guess, on the 28th of April. It was a record-breaking year for Compassion Over Killing's annual Veg Week campaign. We had toward 10,000 or so pledges, I think 9,600 or something, individuals who pledged to try vegan for a week. We send out emails, give them support. It was just an incredible campaign this year. So how did it look from where you sat? And do you know anyone personally who took the Veg Pledge?
It looked great. I know I could just tell by proxy that you were exhausted. There's so many things going on.
There's no doubt.
You feel recovered now?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, there was some re-entry, they call re-entry, some decompression. There was a lot of things that you forget you need to do after a major campaign, and you come into work on Monday and you're like, oh, Veg Week is over. And you're like, oh, wait, that's right. Now we have to do all of those other things. So we've been giving out all of the prizes for the recruiters, the pledgers, all of the people who, again, took the Veg Pledge to take animals and animal byproducts off their plates for those 7 days. And then, of course, we follow up with surveys, and we're going to follow up with a new 3-part exclusive cooking series hosted by Jessica Carter, the food and lifestyle coach from Compassion Over Killing. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful week that we're very proud of. And so it's been great. And, of course, a big part of that is it happened right after this dairy investigation broke.
Yeah. Well, I think that was sort of serendipitous timing.
Yeah.
It's like, look at what's happening in the industry. Here's what you can do about it. And,
Yep.
One of my personal favorite things about Veg Week was that somebody won a Vitamix was one of the prizes.
That's right. Yes, we had some pretty cool prizes this year. So, yeah. And with that, the dairy investigation, we had talked about in the past the dairy industry, Mother's Day, and how people, just obviously need to consider, mothers and parents and small calves being born for milk that we no longer need to consume.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have this conversation. And that's why, really dedicating this episode to the dairy industry, I think can bring all these threads together a little bit. Yeah. I think most people don't even really think much about the dairy industry. Yeah, so we have a special guest with us. We have Emily von Klemperer, who's general counsel at Farm Sanctuary. And I think it would be great just to have a conversation between the three of us. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me and for doing this great podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, it's so nice that you're here. Thank you very much for taking the time out.
So what do we know? So what do we know as activists or advocates when we sort of put that hat on? And for Emily and I as lawyers, and then as parents, how do we think about the dairy industry? I think there's maybe 3 different perspectives. And then Emily, you have the additional perspective of knowing what it's like sort of to personally know mom and baby cows, what they're really like if they get to, live the life that they would like to live. So, I think those are all sort of different ways of looking at this issue and maybe not particularly reflective of what, the average person trying to get their kids to school every morning and just, get the right nutrition in them and get everybody's teeth brushed and into bed at night, what they're thinking about the dairy industry. So, how do we think about this? How do we start this conversation?
Yeah, it's really interesting having Emily on the program because, as you said, Cheryl, the being able to see firsthand how a mother and perhaps her offspring as cows and calves interact with each other. Emily, what do you see, and how do you sort of draw the correlation for whether it's farm sanctuary visitors or people who are supporting the farm sanctuary? How do you draw that correlation to people and individuals to see how dairy cows, or cows in general, can live out their full lives?
So I was just recently at our sanctuary and in Watkins Glen, New York, and I got to spend some time with a mother and calf. The mother is Liz, and the calf is Cashew. Mm-hmm. And they actually came to the sanctuary about 3 years ago when someone had a kind of an unusual dairy. She was actually trying to do a humane dairy, and part of that for her was to not kill the male calves. And as we all know, in order for cows to produce milk, I mean, they're constantly impregnated, and then they give birth, and instead of giving that milk to their babies, their calf is pretty much immediately taken away from them, so that the milk can be used for human consumption. Right. And because of the economics of it, they can't really, the male calves can't be put back into production for dairy. And so they're typically, taken and put into the veal industry, raised for veal, for slaughter and consumption by humans. So this woman who wanted to have a humane dairy was not selling the boys. She was keeping them. And that, of course, gets really expensive if you're, raising animals and not, if you're a dairy and you're producing dairy, but you're not getting any dairy from the boys, obviously. So anyway, eventually they had to go out of business. It wasn't an economical model. And so we were fortunate to get Liz, the mom, and Cashew, her calf. And it just was really incredible to see them. They've been with us for 3 years, and Cashew, unlike, most calves born into the dairy industry that don't necessarily get to nurse from their moms at all, Cashew is actually still nursing from his mom 3 years later. And it's kind of, similar to, experiences that we might have with toddlers where, they're no longer nursing necessarily for nutrition, but Cashew, Cashew, when he gets his hooves trimmed, he gets nervous and he goes and he nurses from his mom, who's right there. He's basically inseparable from.
Wow.
And he's probably like bigger than her.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a wonderful story, Emily. And I can't imagine how heartwarming it must be to see them and their bond that, continues to this day and will continue for their life. That this is her offspring. She gave birth to Cashew, and in, real life, whatever that means, that's the way it's meant to be, that these animals are carrying their young for pretty much the same amount of time that humans carry their young, and giving birth and expecting to be able to spend time with their offspring, with their babies. It's great that you get to see that and have that right here. I actually live in Ithaca, so as you know, I'm very close to Watkins Glen, and oftentimes we head out there, and it's a wonderful place.
That's great.
Yeah, I listening to you talk about, the dairy industry, they have to kind of keep impregnating these cows and then taking them away. It's so sort of profound to think about that, that even a person who would try to be intentional about this and kind of try to mitigate some of the harms on the margins of the dairy industry, right? Like not killing the baby boys, can't, they kind of get thrown off of the economics of it because it just doesn't work unless the infant mother bond is shattered repeatedly. they repeatedly impregnate these cows. And then, so my job here involves a lot of watching that undercover footage. And in this particular investigation, this Pennsylvania one, I spent a lot of time watching the more sort of violent and kind of gory parts of the investigation, which we have no shortage of that in this particular investigation. In fact, this investigation, I feel, was something kind of above and beyond what we've seen before.
Yeah.
But in the middle of all of that, and we do expect to see, the standard practices in the dairy industry are pretty violent and pretty difficult visually to watch because it's just so violent. And then of course we see all this, what some people would say is egregious cruelty, right? This sort of sadistic, hitting, poking. And in this case, we had scalding water being sprayed in their faces and, all sorts of things like that. So in the middle of that, it's sort of this barrage of violence. It's this weird, like contrast, and to look at something like the last moment a calf is able to touch its mother, and the other way around, the last time the mother will see her calf, and this sort of just why do we do this to them?
Yeah.
Why does dairy industry, it's just so, something as sort of simple and mundane really at the end of the day, because this happens in every dairy. Why do we put this through them as part of the system, every day? And there's other things that are part of the system that are just horrifying. And I would say slaughtering baby animals is pretty horrifying by itself. But just that moment of separation really affected me because I was like, wow, this animal has to go through this 5 or 6 times before she's put on a truck and sent to a slaughterhouse.
Yeah, what goes through my mind, and it's, it just piggybacks on what you said in terms of the grim nature of it, is I always think about how scared the babies are, how confused they are, and that a male, very young, just days old, calf being put into a veal crate. And all the photos you see are, it's always raining out. It's always cold. It's always a situation that's already just a horrible way to exist. And knowing that that's, their last days, or weeks, it's so, I get heartbroken thinking about how scared they must be. Emily,
and these are babies, right? They're full-grown babies.
Yeah.
So, one thing that sticks with me about this, and I've heard this in other investigations too, is so in this case, as is the case in the vast majority of dairy farms, the calves have their horns burned off by a hot iron. So it's extremely, you can just watch them kicking and writhing and trying to get out of the way because they have to tie their heads to the side, and it's just extremely painful and violent. But as they're getting them ready in this case, to do that, tying their head to the side of this slats on this crate, the calf is trying to suckle on the worker's fingers.
Yeah. Oh my God.
That's the kind of thing to me that's like, why do we do this? As a species, why do we put these animals through this? And that sort of raised my thoughts about kind of, motherhood and families and what kind of values and sort of the sensitization process that children kind of naturally have, that we just, we kind of run roughshod over that. So that the mothering sort of themes on the dairy industry are just so profound.
So Emily, how many, remind our listeners how many locations there are for Farm Sanctuary, and then, locations where they are, but also where, visitors can meet some of these mothers.
Yeah, thanks. So we have 2 sanctuary locations. One near, as you noted, near you, in Watkins Glen, New York, and that is approximately 300-acre sanctuary location. We've got about 800 animal residents there right now. And then we also have a location on the West Coast that is in Acton, California, much smaller sanctuary, about 45 minutes outside of LA, depending on time of day and traffic. Cheryl, I'm sure, can relate.
Yes.
And both locations offer tours, and we do school trips there as well. And we also do events. Our Watkins Glen location has a big summer hoedown. That's a pretty family-friendly event that, a lot of families will go to year after year. And also, I was just in Watkins Glen. It's a pretty fun place to go, I think, with a family in general. There's a lot of hiking in the area, definitely. And wineries, and the village of Watkins Glen is pretty vegan friendly. There are actually at least 3 different locations that serve vegan ice cream, which is big. When some people say, the hard part about going vegan for them, like I could never give up cheese. Yeah. And I always thought like, oh my gosh, like ice cream. And now there's such an abundance of vegan ice cream. So incredible. Even in Watkins Glen.
Yeah. It's funny. When I was doing research for my second book, which is The Smart Parent's Guide to Raising Vegan Kids, which is part of the reason why this podcast made so much sense for me. I have 2 vegan kids myself. I wanted to do a section on farm sanctuaries, and so I, of course, had Gene Bauer as a contributor to my book. And one of the questions I had to him, which I still to this day am fascinated by this answer, I asked him, what is the first farm sanctuary in the U.S.? And it's Farm Sanctuary. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't believe this whole idea of actually protecting animals and letting them live out their lives, to their natural lifespan is only some 30 years old, 35 years old. It blows my mind that the first shot at this was the Farm Sanctuary.
Well, and the feeling that, you kind of get at a sanctuary, and the way that I think especially kids connect to the animals there is so different than going to something like a zoo. So Emily, what do you see in terms of, the way maybe kids kind of enter into this world, what they get out of it, how they process, this information, and how they kind of connect to the animals?
Yeah, so I'm a mom too, and I have a daughter. She's going to be 2 somewhat soon, and she has been to the sanctuary. And I mean, it's just, it's like kids just have a connection. I think typically, they get it. They understand that these are, these animals are individuals, and to be gentle with them. I don't know. I guess, people as they grow up learn different things, and maybe become desensitized to it or don't think about it. But, kids, I feel like they just kind of get it early on, have that sense of compassion, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because my kids, when we did the first time we went to a sanctuary, they were pretty young. I think my older one was 3, so he wasn't as young as your daughter is now, but my younger one at the time was 1. And it was like, they were normally kind of little kids, like little wrecking balls kind of. And when they went into the sanctuary, it was like they were really ultra like calm and polite, and asked a lot of questions like, what's this one sad story? Can I give this one a cookie? Like, it was a lot of that. It was like the whole environment changed the way that they kind of behaved entirely. Is so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do, at Farm Sanctuary, at our sanctuaries, and also through our humane education program, we really, focus on teaching those, teaching the stories about the animals, teaching how animals are treated, what happens to them when they're raised for food. And, I think that's important to teach young people. And I'm glad to have that opportunity, as a vegan parent and having a vegan child, to be able to teach her those things from a young age. For
our listeners, and because we have 2 legal experts on the podcast today, what legal protections exist for farm animals, factory farmed animals?
Well, it's very little. I'll say that, and Emily, I'll let you take it from there.
I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, there are state cruelty laws that sometimes, in rare, very egregious cases, come into play. But things that are, standard industry practice are just, they're just allowed. They're just allowed to do them, and there's really no legal protection.
Yeah, there's nothing on the federal level for on-farm treatment. So the time that farm animals in general, so the time they're born or hatched until the time that they're shipped to be slaughtered. So with respect to cows, specifically this on-farm treatment, like what we saw in this investigation, is really up to, the state. But then the state isn't going to do anything unless groups like ours do the investigation, bring them a complaint, and then they still can say, in most states, they can just say, no, thank you. And it doesn't matter, how bad something is. That's really kind of like, it's up to them, whether they want to do anything.
So again, for the listener who maybe didn't hear it in the intro, if they visit cok.net/ditch dairy, there's a lot of information about this recent investigation that just broke in April, early April 2019. And some of the footage, again, or most of the footage, is very disturbing. And these are practices that are taking place at this farm, which is not, I don't think, considered a large-scale dairy farm. You talked about the dairy farm, Emily, where Liz came from, was an attempt at an even smaller, I don't know if they call them boutique. What do you call the small dairy farms that are trying to, just say, hey, I treat my animals very, I treat them fairly and they're well loved. And, no matter what, the dairy industry itself, as we know, requires impregnation of a cow in order to have her lactate and in order to get the milk that, people still seem to think they need from a dietary and nutritional perspective. Their offspring needs to be taken away, weaned or removed otherwise. And so no matter how you look at it, the dairy industry itself is just, it's not, something that can continue or should continue.
Yeah. And I think that, I've been vegan for quite a while now. And when I first went vegan, a lot of it was, it largely was learning, some of the things that we talked about the dairy industry, about, the constant impregnation and the, exploitation and the sale of the males into, the veal industry. That was, quite a few years ago. But since I've had my own daughter, I feel like I have just more of an emotional reaction to this concept of, taking babies away from their moms, hours after they're born. And it really has even for those animals that are fortunate enough to get out of the dairy industry and come live in sanctuary, it really has a lifelong impact on them. For the adults, for example, they're bred to produce massive quantities of milk. They in the dairy industry in 2018, I think it was 23,000 pounds per cow of milk over the course of the year. Yeah. And so this breeding for that massive production gives them they have often health problems like mastitis. And then the babies, talking about the separation from mom, it's traumatizing, obviously. We, as parents, I'm sure, we can imagine it's traumatizing for both. But, for the babies, it's often, they'll be more fearful even when they get to the sanctuary. Or they'll have health problems because they didn't get the immunity from their mom. So for another animal that I got to meet when I was at Farm Sanctuary recently was Pippi, who's a calf who came from another, somewhat small dairy, but, like other dairy cows, was taken away from her mom hours after birth. And she has a heart defect, so there was no value in her to them, and so we were able to get her to sanctuary. But she came, with pneumonia. She hadn't gotten the immunity from mom's milk, and so she came with the pneumonia. And she couldn't play with the other animals because it was too much of a risk to her health because she couldn't breathe well and she had the heart defect. And so she had to be put into isolation. And ultimately, we were able to put another dairy rescue in, another calf in with her. And it was, it was like so impactful for her to have a friend and to have somebody to connect with, because she just had been taken away from her mom, at birth. And then unfortunately, the calf that she was able to connect with had health problems as well and had to go to the vet. And Pippi just mooed the whole time, the other calf was away, obviously in distress at the loss of her companion. And that's just what happens in dairies every day when they're taken away from their mom and are alone and, fearful and sick. And
yeah, we did an investigation in Colorado of a calf ranch, which is still up on our website. And that is another one where, I expected to some degree the level of violence, although it's a particularly unique thing to watch people throw babies around, I think, and be really aggressive toward them. But the just visual of seeing all these babies in this long row, in these individual pens, and tons of them were sick. You can imagine, like, it's just so unnatural and kind of bizarre that we do this. It's like there's all these babies who were born a day or two ago, and it's like the moms are just absent, and they're just kind of dropped off. These babies are just dropped off at they called it a calf ranch. So, that was their specialty, was to kind of take these babies who often came in with some pretty serious, health issues, and, were cruelly treated, but also just, isolated from obviously the strong need they would have had to be with their moms and, for their own physical health in addition to everything else. So I didn't know that until we had done that investigation, that there was so much sickness, and that's sort of part of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about, as parents. They say, it's really good for babies to be with their moms and, get immunity from mom's milk. And, it's like that with cows too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so can you imagine, a room full of just 2-day-old human babies? Like, that would, in no world would that look normal. If the moms are sort of nowhere to be found. So, that's just sort of part of the dairy industry. The dairy industry exists because of destroying that bond.
Yeah.
And
on every level.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I was just going to say, I'm really shocked that, when I hear people don't realize that necessarily, like, or, maybe they just hadn't thought about the fact that, like, in order for these cows to produce milk, they have to have babies. Yeah. And, in order for us to have their milk, they have to take the babies away from the cows, so the milk can go to humans. Yeah. And it, it just seems so kind of straightforward to me and so, yeah, just really sad.
That's what it comes down
but,
to.
people just don't necessarily realize it or think about it.
Well, I don't know if this has been your experience, but, I think that's exacerbated by the culture of new parents, especially new moms with infants, being told by pediatricians and sort of general, community wisdom, I guess, that, babies need to have cow's milk, which is just so, again, bizarre. The whole thing is just so kind of surreal that we even do this. But, I remember going into the pediatrician and them saying, just without kind of looking up from the clipboard, being like, okay, how many ounces of milk are you still giving them whole milk? And I mean, like, oh, we're vegan. And then I remember the pediatrician going, okay, well, what about like almond milk or soy milk? And I'm like, you realize like those are all like very different things. Like, why are we even in this place where we're having this conversation? They don't need the milk in the first place. Right. It's like there's a basic biological setup already for human babies and human milk. And that's good. That's fine. We don't need to involve cows, So, but I do think there is an additional barrier put up. And I don't know if that was your experience too, that suddenly everybody's sort of, frantically trying to make sure that enough cow's milk is getting into babies. And that's sort of this, additional irritation for vegans.
Yeah, I feel like I was actually pretty fortunate in that way. I don't know if, my pediatrician was just more educated or what, but they actually said something like, oh, well, that's good that you're vegan because sometimes I think she said like you can get an iron deficiency if you have too much cow's milk. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's great. We don't have to worry about that.
That's interesting. I heard that recently from a doctor. Like sometimes kids who just drink too much milk, like they get anemia. So interesting.
Yeah. It's such an interesting point. Again, pediatricians are trained to, most of them, that have been traditionally trained are trained to tell parents, okay, so breastfeeding is over. Which are you going to start them on? Which milk are you going to start them on? And as you were saying, Cheryl, that's something that alone is not the truth. You don't need it. You don't need to find even a milk replacement. You don't need that nutrition. Right. Of course, these non-dairy milks are just as enriched and as good for you, actually better for you, of course, than dairy milk. But it's not necessarily a need to replace what wasn't required in the first place.
Yeah, I think of them more like fun foods. Like we talked in like our junk food episode about like why would you want to have, so I think about like some of these vegan milks and vegan ice creams and cheeses are just like so delicious that it's like, okay, well, this is dessert. This is like, what we're going to have for a treat, but I definitely don't think of it as a staple in the diet. It does not need to be.
Yeah, I'm actually addicted right now to Elmhurst. I don't know if you know the story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Elmhurst 1925 is actually an upstate New York dairy farm. They did dairy milk for 90 years and then switched over to plant-based milks. And they have their packaging says milked cashews, milked almonds, milked peanuts. And the container's a little bit different. And so it caught my eye, and I've just fallen in love with their oat milk and their cashew milks. And as you say, they're so incredibly tasty on their own that there's people who still will say, well, I still prefer, the taste of cow's milk, which I don't think they actually do. I think they've just somehow mentally trained themselves.
They're used to it.
That's what it's supposed to taste like, because these taste like shakes. They taste like milkshakes. They're sweet, they're vanilla, they're delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Elmer's ones are ultra healthy too. Like you can go in the, sugary side of things and the doctored up, ice creams and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is this feeling that people have that like cow's milk is somehow like the standard. I think you have to almost get a distance from, you have to get into that zone where you're like, wow, why do we do this to these animals? Exactly. The fact that this industry exists is just so, sort of wrong and bizarre before you even start to break that assumption. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest and I still see, people in their 30s and 40s drinking glasses of milk during the day, which I think is so weird. Like now as like, this sort of veteran vegan sort of in my middle age almost, it's like, why are people doing that? It's so strange.
Yeah.
But so what has your experience been, Emily? Do you feel like as a parent now, do you feel like this, the vegan issue generally has been hard to navigate? Or, I know your daughter is young. I don't know if she kind of has started to understand any of this yet, or what is kind of your plan or your concerns?
Yeah, I guess the hardest part for me is knowing maybe like how strict to be with other people, she goes to daycare and they provide food at daycare. And so every week they give me a menu and I cross things out. Like, don't give her the ground beef. Don't give her the milk, the cheese, and I bring other things for her. I'll make homemade stuffed shells with tofu or, vegan meatballs or something like that and take stuff to school for her. But if someone brings in cupcakes for a kid's birthday or something like that, I have a sweet tooth and I feel bad. I feel bad saying, don't ever let my child participate. Yeah. And it's so much easier, if I were throwing a birthday party, I would make a bunch of vegan cupcakes and they would be delicious and everybody would love them. And, they'd be like, oh, vegan is great. Right. But it's a little challenging when, it's somebody else providing it and it's like a celebration of some sort. It's hard.
Yeah.
We've got every sort of stage here, or somewhat. Again, with my book, I interviewed a lot of parents with varying different levels of ages of children, but also situations, blended families and things like that. So you have a 2-year-old. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. Cheryl, your 2 are around
3 and 5.
3 and 5, yeah. So we all have young vegan kids, and we're all committed to doing the best we can for our kids, giving them that head start on excellent health, of course, giving them a much more compassionate outlook on life, raising them to love all animals, truly love all animals, and then really, being sort of a generation of people who are committed to helping the planet too. So, on this call alone, we've got a real great start at, a youngest generation of vegans, up and coming vegans. And dairy is a big part of it. A lot of the things that we were raised on were dairy focused or dairy based. And because we are smart enough and are looking out for our own kids and now our own health as well, we've cut that out. And we found replacements that are just as tasty, if not tastier, and so much better for everyone.
And, I think the saying dairy is a big part of that is really interesting, because I think what happens, the difficulty kind of, like you say, Emily, that with the, if somebody else is sort of running the show, what do you do? And the concern that she'll feel kind of left out. I think that part is heavily related to dairy, because really nobody's like, or rarely is somebody going to be like, have this steak to like a 2-year-old, right? But they are going to be like, have this cupcake or whatever. Yeah. And
pizza,
yeah, and like the sort of the language of birthday party seems to be pizza and cake. So I had those same kinds of concerns, but then as soon as each kid in their own way really sort of started to just love their veganism, like feel really kind of empowered by it, I was not worried. Like, as long as I still kind of run around and get them the vegan versions. Like, we stop at Whole Foods and get like a vegan donut, and then Whole Foods gives like a pizza. Like, they always have a vegan pizza made, like 2 different flavors, like a plain vegan cheese one and like one with toppings. But like the pizza slice is like the size of your head. Like, it's yes, ridiculous. So, I always kind of do that and give them the options. And at school, sometimes, I don't know ahead of time, so I might have to do it like afterwards, but I've got 2 little police, vegan police kids now, like for themselves, right? They know now at school, like if somebody brings in a treat, like Logan's teacher, my older one's teacher was like, Logan was like, let me see the ingredients on that and see if it's vegan. And she just thought that was like so funny. And I'm like, yeah, that's like what he does. So I think it's, there's this sort of, empowering element once they kind of get it.
At what age does that start?
Well, Paisley's 4.
Yeah, I think 2.5, 3 is when they started to really engage on that level with it.
Paisley calls herself gluten-free vegan.
That's so cute.
It's like her badge of honor. I'm gluten-free vegan. And so if there's a snack or something, she'll not say she can't have it. She'll just tell people, I'm gluten-free vegan. And so that either fits the category of what she can eat or it doesn't. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of this. To me, that's a lot of the fun of raising vegan kids, is seeing them figure themselves out, figure out their environments, figure out their own comfort level, their own challenges. With Cooper, our 6-year-old, he just started kindergarten, so that opened up a whole new Pandora's box for things that we can't control because we're not there. But again, it's so worth it. It's so worth it for everybody involved.
Yeah, and it's also a chance for activism. I think when definitely. you're bringing the vegan options, the vegan alternatives, and your child is saying I'm vegan, proudly.
Yeah.
They're the other kids and the other moms and dads and families and people are learning what that means and all the great options that are out there for agree. Vegan food.
Yep. I think that the vegan kids are the cool kids now. The kids that are eating bacon aren't. And so I'm very proud to be raising 2 vegan kids. So what's
we've
next
had
for-
other vegan kids. Well, we've met other vegan kids, which is great. But we've had other kids say they want to go vegan after. I mean, because I think also even adults, like, you know, you can't be like upset at a 3-year-old like saying, you know, they want to help the animals. Like, it's too cute. Like, who could be upset by that? It's different than like a 35-year-old saying it.
Exactly. That's a really good point. So, Emily, as we sort of close this episode, what's next for Farm Sanctuary? What's happening in the coming months or year?
Well, we just opened up tour season in Watkins Glen, so that's, you know, it's an exciting time of year that people can come visit and, you know, meet the animals for themselves and learn about the animals and about veganism. So that's, you know, that's
spring brings the opening for Watkins Glen. Yeah.
Yeah. We also another big thing that we've just around Earth Day released is we've got a humane education curriculum that teaches about the environment and you know, environmental impacts of animal agriculture. So that's you know, that's recently released and doing really well in schools.
What's the age range for that, and how can parents or kids get that to be taught in their schools?
So you can go to our website, farmsanctuary.org, and there's a way to reach out, to contact us. There's the option for teachers to contact us, either to have our humane educators come into their schools. We currently have humane educators in New York City, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And there's also an option for teachers to reach out to us and get the curriculum from us so that they can do it.
Wow.
They can teach it themselves. Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, thank you, Emily. Happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy Mother's
little
Day.
one. So it's been great talking to you. I'm going to head out to Watkins Glen very soon, actually. As you said, it's still sort of mud season here in upstate New York, but definitely want to get over there, say hello to all the animals. Cheryl, you get out to the one in Acton soon, and
we got to make our sanctuary planning because we haven't been in. This is making me really want to go.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for taking the time out again. Thank you for all you do for the animals. And Cheryl, happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Emily, and happy Mother's Day.
Thank you. Happy Mother's Day to everybody. And thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. And if you have ideas for episodes, you can email us at veganfamily@triveg.com. You can check out a bunch of recipes for your family at triveg.com. And again, if you want to know more about the recent investigation, go to cok.net/ditch dairy. And thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for tuning in to Compassion Over Killing's Vegan Family Podcast. Have episode ideas or questions about going vegan? Email us at govegan@triveg.com.